Good evening, everyone. My name is Lauren Abbas, and I'm the Leader Speak Series Coordinator. I'd like to welcome you tonight for the third installment of the Leader Speak Series. Our third guest speaker is entrepreneur Michael Ott, and he will be presenting the Wayward Path To Success, which will highlight lessons he has learned while starting a new business venture. Will you please help me welcome Michael to the stage?
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. So I was invited by my good friend Matt to talk about some lessons that I've learned, places that I've been, some stories, and try to relate them to the college audience. One of the things that is interesting to me thinking about college kids and trying to realize their potential and learning where you're going to go and what's going to happen. It's amazing to see where you'll go and what that will turn into. I'm a chemist that works in finance, so where I intended to go and where I ended up are completely different. So is this echoing? We're good? All right, good. So one of the things that I've always talked about is the Wayne Gretzky story. And he says he wasn't skating any faster than anyone else. He was skating where the puck was going. And you got to think about, as you're going through this process, what's going on and what's changing as you're going through it, and what comes out at the end, how that's going to be different. We do venture capital, so we invest in and start up new companies. One of our companies is called Electricaea, and it's got a really cool technology that takes carbon dioxide and turns it into natural gas. So the waste product that's coming out of a smokestack, we can actually capture that and turn it into a very desirable input. So it's a cool thing. In the process of developing that technology, commercializing it, finding partners, getting investors and everything else, the price of natural gas went from $13 a million BTU down to $4. So it changed dramatically. The technology worked. It was really cool. It's still a good thing that it was. However, the market completely changed. And what we found is that in Germany and in Denmark, they're willing to pay up to triple for renewable natural gas. So now we're deploying the technology there. So it's a good lesson learned on, well, this changed in the middle of the process, so we've got to change where we're going. This isn't going to be a US-based business. This is we got to go where the market is. So kind of an interesting thing. I think that's a good story to think about for college crew. So my story starts out when I was in chemistry grad school. The stock market in the late 90s, early 2000s was going crazy. Everything was going up and up and up. I started investing, and I was super smart because everything went up, and everything that I bought was worth more than what I bought it for. Amazing. So I started talking to some investors and finance guys, and ended up consulting for a hedge fund. We were super smart. Everything that we bought, the price went up. We had a couple actually pretty good ideas. One of them was in buying small and micro-cap biotech stocks. So as soon as these stocks were going to get their ruling from the FDA, we never bought anything that was more than $5. It was usually about $2 or $3. And they'd get a positive ruling and it would jump up to $12, $15, $18. They'd get a negative ruling down to $1. So your upside was better than your downside. And we made a fair bit of money that way. I had a good idea looking at who were going to be the keynote speakers at big conferences. If you're the lead guy talking at the American Cancer Society, that gets announced, 3 months from now, he's going to be the speaker. Well, look who he's doing research with, what that company is, buy that stock, because sure enough, if he's going to get this, or he or she is going to get this great keynote spot, they're going to be announcing something nice. So buy those stocks early. So we had a couple good ideas. Those worked really well. And the stock market was going up. Everything was great. It was easy, easiest money ever made. Then I started looking at a few of these technologies and realizing this is pretty cool, but I'm a scientist. Let's actually look at what they're doing and what the products are. And I got looking at a company called Human Genome Sciences. They were sequencing your genome. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, the US government was doing this and Human Genome Sciences was doing it. And it was a competition. President Clinton came out and declared it was a tie, but everybody knew Human Genome Sciences had the best technology, a CEO that was like a marketing wizard. It was a hype machine. It was the hottest stock out there. And we got looking at it and we're like, well, I don't get what they're going to sell. If you can tell me my genome in 2001, I don't know what I can do with that. You can't design a drug around it. You can't improve my life expectancy. There's not much that you can actually do with that information. As cool as it is and how you can get that information cheaper than anyone else, I don't think there's a product that they can sell. So we were looking at it, and I said, we should short this stock. And everyone said, you're crazy. This is like the hottest thing out there. Like remember how hot Apple was and how hot Google was a couple years ago? This is like saying, let's short them, basically bet that they're going to go down. When you're investing in stocks, you go long if something is going to go up, or short if it's going to go down. So eventually, we put them on a list that we called bullshit stocks because we said their technology was bullshit. And there's a whole list of them. Human Genome Sciences is the best one. We looked at it, we shorted them at 120, it went up to about 140, and then down to 7. So we made a ton of money going down. And this is actually where we were smart because the market went up, everybody made money. The market went down, we still made money. So we got to be thinking we were pretty smart, we knew what we were doing. So I had a $30 million fund. And I guess the lesson learned on human genome, looking at the actual value creation, like are you doing something that matters, that someone needs to buy? There's a lot of cool technology out there. As we do venture capital, we see new technologies all the time. But the question I always ask is, who needs to buy that? Does that make someone's life easier? Is it cheaper? Is it better? What makes this more affordable, and what's the value that's created there? So looking at that, our hedge fund had $30 million. We got really smart. We were going to raise a whole bunch more, raise $600 million. It was a huge deal. We were really excited about it. Started doing what we had always done. And what we discovered is that we were too big. As we were buying these cheap stocks, the amounts that we had to buy them in because we had all this money to use, we were moving the stocks away from what we wanted to. We were increasing the price as we bought them, cutting into our margins. We weren't able to be as nimble and flexible as we were. We didn't realize that we got bigger and tried to do the same thing. So that was a great business lesson, to always think about what's changing and how are you able to adapt. So bad situation happened. The managing partner decided he still wanted the lifestyle that he had when things were going so well, and he ended up leaving with all the money, just embezzling and absconding with it. So luckily I was not too high on the totem pole at that time. This is one of the times where it's good to be low on the totem pole. Got out of it and had my reputation mostly intact. Came back, started working with a group, started talking to a guy, what do you want to do after this? He had some early success, and I was like, well, I've always wanted to run my own venture capital fund. I had a lot of success investing in these biotechnology things. Let's do that. And this was a guy with lots of money. He had money here, money there, all this other stuff. So he knew people that I knew. I didn't know him that well. And we ended up trying to set up a deal where I was going to get $25 million for a VC fund. He was going to be my sole investor. I was going to invest in biotechnology. So we talked every day for a couple months. We'd do this, we'd do that, and figure out all the plans and everything else. Pretty interesting, pretty fun. Came to actually get all the things signed. I had spent a bunch of money on lawyers' fees. I spent all my own money that I'd made in the hedge fund. Spending all this, we're going to set this up. This guy's in. Had a baby, came home, I had a son that was born, and had a signed agreement in my fax machine. This is back when people still had fax machines. So it was a great day. New baby in the world, VC fund is all set up, ready to go. All we got to do is just get this check. So I was like, all right, how do you want to get this money to me? He's like, oh, I'll just put it in a registered mail certified check. It's like, it's kind of it's not the path that I would choose, but it's your money, you want to do that, that's all right. So a couple days go and the check doesn't arrive, and I'm like, what's the tracking number on that? The tracking number didn't have enough digits, so I was a little bit of worry, but he knows everything's fine, but his mom is sick, so he's gonna be in the hospital with her a little bit, but everything's okay. All right, so let's figure this out. And he's like, I'll just wire you the money. That's what we should have done the first time. So he goes to wire me the money, and he had one of his people do it. He didn't do it. And it turns out he doesn't have $50 million in that account because he's got the outstanding check that's out there and this wire. So that wire didn't go through and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what? Why don't you just tell me exactly where you are, and I will drive or fly there, and we will get this figured out. I'll come down to Florida. Whatever I have to do, I'll be there in 24 hours or less. Well, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't. Turns out he never had any money. I don't know what he was doing. The whole time I was talking to a friend of mine saying, he's got no motivation here. He's not really getting anything out of this. I've told him my strategy, which is fine. I'd tell any youth this strategy. The whole thing was based on the contacts and the knowledge that I had. He saw the documents, and they're legal documents. You could buy those for a few $1,000s. I never really understood what he was, and that was the lesson for me, is sometimes people will just screw you. He just wanted to have the attention. I really don't know, but it was months and months of my time trying to set this up, and that's how it goes. So I had to go and network and get a job, and one of the things that I like to talk about is the value of networking. So I talked to dozens of people, but the path that led me to the job that I got, I talked to a friend of mine who introduced me to a banker, who introduced me to a woman in Ottumwa, who then ended up talking to a guy and had a job in Eddyville at the Bioprocess Training Center. So that random path, I had lots and lots of connections, but to get to that one, I had to go through all those different iterations. So I think that's interesting as you're out there looking for where that job may come from. You never know what it's going to be. So did that for a while and saw this big trend happening. And I like to look at kind of a higher level of what's going on in the industry. And I saw, this is early 2000s at this time, mid 2000s, of what's happening in ethanol and biodiesel. Technology had decreased the cost to produce ethanol and biodiesel. Oil prices were up, corn prices were down, farmers were wanting to invest, they had some capital. This was a boom, this was a market to get in on. And I had science knowledge, I had finance knowledge, helped a bunch of people raise a bunch of money, start up ethanol plants, biodiesel plants, started a consulting group doing bio-based technology. So anytime you replace something petroleum-based with something that was grown. So had a lot of success, got to travel all over the world working on deals. I went to Brazil for a month. I went to Ukraine. I gave a speech to the Ukrainian Congress, got to go see Chernobyl. Really fun, really cool things. Things were blowing up. Didn't realize it was a bubble at the time, but it was certainly accelerated, maybe more than it should have. Lived the high life when it was good. Then the flood of 2008 happened. I was actually in Brazil for a while, came back to the flood, and had a whole summer's worth of consulting projects and deals to get going. And the flood killed every single one of those. So sometimes Mother Nature intervenes and changes your plans. So up and down, everything was fine. Worked some other job, it was okay. And then once again started networking and realized that I had met a guy on a bus. We were in Chicago at a conference in the middle of the summer, about 120 people on a bus designed to hold 60. As packed in as you could possibly be, sweating on each other. I started talking to this guy. It turns out he's got a really cool job, and started interviewing with him, talked to his boss, and ended up getting a position with this group called Nidus Investment Partners. So what we do at Nidus is invest in and start up new companies. It's corporate venture capital. So we're focused on energy and agriculture, the things that we know and understand and are good at. Learned a lot about how to set up new businesses, worked with a bunch of entrepreneurs, worked with farmers, worked with companies, and the corporations that we partner with realized that they're really good at taking a $20 to $50 million business and turning it into a $1 billion business, but they're really bad at going from 0 to 20. So we've started up a range of companies that are doing different things. Some of them are bio-based chemicals, so we're using natural sources to make chemicals that were formerly made out of petroleum. We've got a few companies doing that. We have a few electricity companies, one that has a pneumatic valve that's a more efficient way to make electricity at an actually electrical power plant. We've got a technology that unfortunately is dependent on something else. On a car battery, in a battery you've got a cathode and an anode, a positive and a negative side. We have the best cathode on the market. Anode technology is not developed at the same pace. So we're sitting on the best positive side of a car battery waiting for the other side to catch up. So sometimes you got to think about what's needed to be required for the entire product to work. So in this instance, we have a really cool thing in a market. Electric car batteries are going up. It's a perfect deal, except for we're missing one critical component, and it turns out we're not very good at that, and neither is anyone else. We've tried to look for it, and so that company is sitting on hold. So you learn a lot from the ones that don't work. The ones that do work, it seems to be obvious in retrospect. So that's what we've been doing with Nidus. The company that I started there is called Terra Biologics, and it's kind of an interesting path, to me anyway, because I've been living it, of where we started and what we're going. So looking at all these different technologies related to energy and agriculture, I personally looked at about 200 over a 6-month time frame, found 9 that I thought were pretty interesting, and presented on a couple of them to our corporate partners and our venture partners, and one really resonated with everyone. And it turned into a company company called Terra Biologics. And what we started with Terra is looking at components of soil. So algae that lives in the soil actually can help restore soil when it's torn up. So if you've got a wildfire or natural gas exploration or ranching or whatever that tears up western soil, arid soil, it takes a really long time for that to recover. So what we discovered is that we can take that algae, grow it up in a lab, and spray it back on there, and it'll bring the soil back faster. And this is important because when soil is torn up, say from a wildfire, the first thing that grows is called cheatgrass. Cheatgrass has no nutritional value, so grazing animals don't eat it, and it's highly combustible. So it's basically a field full of fuel. As soon as that lightning strikes, as soon as whatever else happens, starts a fire, it burns, cheatgrass comes back, you get caught in this wildfire cycle. So we're going to try to break that. So that's a 3 to 5 year process to kind of prove how all that works and how things work in the field. That takes a long time. So we got those trials going. We're growing this algae, we're doing this stuff, and I'm like, well, what else can we do with this algae? So I started looking at these organisms and things that are related to them. And I find a thing that says in rice, you can add related organisms, and it increases nitrogen, and it increases rice yield. Like, oh, that's kind of cool. We should try that and see if it works. So we do some trials down at the University of Arkansas, pour this stuff in rice pots as they're growing in a greenhouse. And turns out we got like 13% yield increases, which in agriculture, 13% is huge. It's in a greenhouse, it's in a pot, it's in a controlled situation, so that's much bigger than it's ever really going to be. But it was pretty interesting. So we're thinking about, what else can we do? And these researchers had come up with this idea saying, why don't you have farmers grow this and then apply it to their own fields, and then you can just sell them a feedstock. Like, that's not a very good business idea. Like, it requires farmers to do something that they're not very good at. It requires them to do a lot more work. That doesn't work very well. Like, can we come up with the same end result, but a more elegant solution? So think and think and think. And I get to thinking, well, what if we put it on as a seed coating? So this algae is naturally kind of sticky. It reduces erosion because it's really sticky and holds bits of the soil together. So like, I wonder if that would work as a seed coating. Let's give it a try. So it turns out it's perfect as a seed coating. It's naturally sticky, it just jumps right on the seed. So all right, let's see what happens when we put it in the field. So we do a field trial. We had the old style and then we had the new style, trying to figure out how this is going to go. And I remember getting the results. I was sitting with my girlfriend. We were having lunch and I got the email, all right, the trial results are in. So like, what's our yield increase? And I do the math on my calculator. And I come up and I say, it's 22% yield increase. And she's like, that's not right. I was like, yeah, it's 2.2. Like, I did something wrong. So I do it again, and it's 22. I was like, you look at this. And she's a Harvard graduate. She's a doctor. She knows how to do this simple calculation. I got a master's degree in chemistry. I know how to do this simple calculation. Like, this isn't right. So we look at it, like, yeah, it is right. We had a 22% increase in yield. And it turns out that this works best in a low fertilizer situation. So we got to looking at, well, what's going to happen on, where do they grow rice in a low fertilizer situation? It turns out rice is responsible for 1/4 of the calories consumed by mankind. Most of it is grown in India, China, Thailand, Vietnam, where they don't have enough fertilizer. So now we're working on a deal where we're adding this as a seed coating to rice and partnering up with some Indian seed companies. And I've been to India 5 times in the last year setting up these deals. So there's an interesting path of how you get there and how that all comes together. So trying to figure out, what we're doing in this moment. We're on the cusp of licensing it. We're looking at putting it in wheat. We're putting it in cotton. And none of this was intended. None of this was known at the outset. At the outset, we were an arid soil restoration company. We're still doing that. We got a trial going in Colorado. It's okay. It's a nice potential business. However, what we led to was a much bigger and better thing. So a lesson learned from there is keep your eyes open. You never know what's going to turn up and where things may go. So that's kind of where I was, and I've talked way too fast. One of the other things that I like to think about is on partnering and the way that you can articulate what you're doing. And a story that I learned from the rice business is being able to articulate what you do very precisely. And I always say you should be able to articulate what you're doing in less than 6 words. So I've kind of talked about this. I've done a lot of work with the Iowa Startup Accelerator, which is a group up in Cedar Rapids that helps companies get started. And I always say, clearly distill what you're doing. And there's a reason for that. So with Terra Biologics, we are increasing rice yields with natural algae. 6 words that tells you exactly what we're doing. So I've talked to a few companies about this, can you do this for your company? And once you do that, it really brings clarity to what you are thinking about doing. Like, if this is our tactic that we think that we want to do, does that fit with what our mission is? Are we, does this come in agreement with what we want? That's also important when you're trying to articulate your vision and what you want to do for partnering. I was at the World Food Prize a couple weeks ago in Des Moines. The CEO of Kellogg's was there. Big deal, big company, selling a lot of cereal, selling a lot of Rice Krispies. He was like, well, I help Rice grow. He sells Rice Krispies. That could be a potentially good thing. He gives his spiel up in front of everyone in a big area. The CEO of Hormel comes up next, and Hormel's interesting, but I don't really care about them. The CEO of Kellogg's comes walking by, and I jump up right next to him. I'm like, we increase rice yields using natural algae. And he looks at me and goes, oh, all right, I should have you talk to this guy. So talk to this guy and then this woman, and now we're talking to Kellogg. And that's because we're able to clearly articulate what you're doing. So I've shared this story a couple times in the last couple weeks, and it seems to be really positive. I had another good experience with one of the companies in the Iowa Startup Accelerator. Their company is called Ace Blooms. They're selling flowers online. And they articulated their vision as save time buying flowers online. And everything that they do, they think, well, does this make it cheaper? Does this make it faster? Does this add functionality? Whatever it is, they cut out all sorts of steps because it doesn't save time. And their big thing is saving time. And that works for them, it's working for their business. And I think as you're out there thinking about what your business is, what your personal mission is, I think that's a good lesson to think about. I also have a personal mission statement that I've always thought is making money while doing good things. I think as you're putting together a business, you've got to make money. You're creating jobs, you're helping customers, you're doing good things for the world, whatever it is. If you aren't making money, all those jobs go away. All the infrastructure that you invested in, everything goes away. So making money, it's important to me to lead off with that. And it's while doing good things. So we did have a few somewhat ethical dilemmas with Nidus, looking at companies, and one that I wanted to talk about was a company that had a big mixer. Basically, they could mix liquids no matter what kind of container they were in. If it was a big cylinder, a little cup, or a big amorphous pool. So what this guy discovered is that he can mix up water that had been setting out after fracking had occurred. So when you frack, you use a ton of water, and it can't be treated because what happens in a fracking pond is there gets to be stratified layers where there's one that's all full of hydrocarbons, one that's all full of sand, one that's all full of this other junk. And if you could just mix it up equally, then you could treat it. But you can't treat all these different components all at once. So this guy had a mixing technology, and it was a pretty cool application. When we look at it, there are literally trillions of gallons of water. That this is a big, big market opportunity. So as we're looking at, what's an interesting investment, what can we do? Like, well, this hits, so there's a big deal. There's a problem out there that people want to solve. Is this good for the world? And we really had an interesting ethical dilemma. Is this, well, are we solving this fracking problem, this water that's already existing, or are we going to stimulate the amount of fracking by exacerbating the existing situation? So we went back and forth, and then in the end decided not to, because we did think that it was going to increase the amount of fracking that was happening, and that doesn't really fit with the core of what we want to do. So as you're looking at energy and agriculture, you've got to be sustainable and you've got to be able to, push things forward that are going to be good for the world. And that one, as good of a market opportunity it was, as cool as the technology was, didn't quite line up with what we wanted. So that's something that I always think about, when I'm looking at things, and I think as college students and people that are going out, venturing into the world, trying to see, how that lines up with your core values. If you can clearly articulate your vision and what you're doing, and then live up to that, I think that'll lead to a fun and happy life. So thank you very much for the time. I'm happy to answer any questions or respond to anything that you may have to say. And she's got a microphone, so I think they'll do that for there.
So listening to you talk, it seems like as far as one of the qualities of an entrepreneur that at least I hear you saying is you have to be comfortable with a certain level of risk. Mm-hmm. Are there other qualities that you think are in the entrepreneurs that you've worked with that you sort of recognize that these are the people I work with? You can sort of tell they have the right mindset.
Yeah, the quality of an entrepreneur that's going to be successful is bullheaded but not stupid. So you've got to just be like, I'm putting my head down, I'm going to go do this, even though people tell me it can't be done, but you're not doing something that's just dumb. So there's a quote that I don't have it exactly right, but it's like, reasonable men, it's a Gershwin quote. The takeaway from it is that when you are trying to do something new, there's a reason that no one has done it before. Therefore, to do something new, you've got to be unreasonable. And all progress, therefore, depends on unreasonable people. So that's what it is. It's like, well, I think this is a better idea, and it hasn't been done yet. However, if we could implement it in that way and make it work. And sometimes you get a vision that works, and sometimes you don't. But also just very, very flexible with what you're able to do and where you go while maintaining some good core values.
Thank you.
So I teach entrepreneurship at Indian Hills and Ottumwa, and I think your comments on networking, particularly for students to be willing to have that conversation with the person next to them on the bus, and all those sorts of things that lead us down the different paths in life. As far as encouraging students for that, do you think that came naturally to you, or was that something you had to practice at to be comfortable talking to people? And is there anything you would say to students to tell them how to get comfortable with that and why that's so important?
I think you have to get comfortable with it because it's so important. And it's interesting to me seeing millennials that typically don't want to have conversations. So my girlfriend, now fiance, is considerably younger than I am. And she doesn't want to talk to anyone if she doesn't have to. Whereas I would much rather I'll talk to the bartender, I'll talk to the cab driver, I like just to see what that is. And I think that's so important because you never know what connections are going to come out of there. And the jobs that worked out for me I wasn't necessarily going right down that path. It wasn't like, I'm going to talk to you and boom. It's like, I talked to this guy who might know this person and then that woman and everything else. So I think you have to be forced into it. And I think that's something that as people are growing up more technology dependent and they don't want to have those face-to-face interactions when they would rather have a screen-to-screen interaction, it's so much easier to ignore an email or a voicemail or a text than it is to someone right in front of you. So I think it's critical that people, if they aren't used to it or they don't like it, they just have to get over it and find a way to get it done.
I have a question. You had the entrepreneur idea when you were a chemistry graduate, but I would like to know, before thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, what were your dreams?
I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer like everyone else did growing up. That seemed to be the common thing in the small town that we were. And went to Simpson, and I really found that chemistry resonated with me. And it just is that, for me, that's the thing that made sense. And everyone's like, oh, organic is so hard. And I was like, no, like it just works, like you can see, and that's how my mind works. So what I would say for someone is, whatever that thing is for you, if it's marketing, if it's biology, if it's engineering, or whatever that thing is that you get it, that's your thing. And then if you can try and find a way to make a business around that, that's what I would recommend.
Thank you.
At what point in your life, career life, did you sort of slip into that clarifying vision statement that you gave? I mean, was it a process? Did you recognize it quickly? Did you own it immediately? Was it, curious to know.
When I was looking at the raising money for ethanol and biodiesel plants, like that was the time where I was like, okay, like I kind of bopped around into a series of different things. And then this is like, this is what I want. It's in the Midwest. I'm from Iowa. I like living here. I've traveled around a bunch, but I like being in the Midwest. And it's a great entrepreneurial opportunity. It's good for the world. It's good for farmers. It's, good things are happening. And then I got to thinking about it, like, that's what I should do. Like, and so for me, that's what it was. So as I've talked to some people, then they kind of sit and tell me, oh, this is the thing that's important to them. Like, that's great. And I think as long as you're doing the thing that's important for you. So yeah, for me, I was, 25, 26 when it kind of crystallized. And it wasn't like that moment, but I've really done that in the last few years of like, okay, articulate precisely what you're doing. And I really like 6 words. 7 is too many, but 6 is just right.
Going back to networking. So like you said, millennials have the bigger problem with communicating with each other because we're used to doing everything on the screen and stuff like that.
Yes.
Are there any type of practices that you did that helped you improve your ability to communicate? Or is it just like, forget it, I'll just say whatever, and if it works, it works?
Yeah, I think it's just learning in social situations what to do, what's appropriate and inappropriate. Like, what we talk about, how do you want to have that interaction go? And just kind of practicing again and again. And then I really do like the random interaction with the stranger next to me at a restaurant or whatever it is, because you never know what's going to turn into. So sometimes when you're on vacation and you see somebody there, so I think it's just practicing over and over and over again, and you never know. Sometimes you'll find a friend for life. I have an aunt and uncle that were on vacation, met somebody down in the Caribbean. They lived in England, and they spent a week together every year for 20 years after that, because they had a fun time meeting these people. They would either go to England or the English couple would come back to Iowa. So you meet a fun group like that, and they're lifelong friends due to some random interaction, and you wonder how many times you've seen somebody interesting but you didn't talk to them. So maybe it's a little bit of fear of missing out on that.
Hi. Did you follow the case of Theranos with Elizabeth Holmes?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know why, for some reason, when you're speaking, that just came to my mind. I was watching a CNN piece on Theranos, and I was just so impressed, well, not impressed, I was so shocked about how a company can get so much acclaim.
Yes.
An inventor can get so much acclaim for an idea that's quite innovative in a sense, that's solving many issues, blood testing, but it can just have an issue with execution and communication and transparency. So I just wanted you to kind of give your opinion on that specific case and how that relates to being a young inventor.
So the Theranos case was interesting. If you're not familiar with it, it's a young woman that started a company, claimed to be able to do all these things with blood testing, that they could do it with just a drop of blood and do better, cheaper testing, and spun all sorts of hype about, and she had a very great vision, very clearly articulated what she was doing. The technology did not match up to it. And whether she knew it or not, or intentionally siloed people so that people in the company didn't know exactly what was going on, is up for debate right now. The thing that was indicative to me, knowing enough people in the venture capital space, she didn't have what I would call top shelf investors. And then her board was like Henry Kissinger and like George Shultz, who are like big known names, but they don't know anything about blood testing. And they're like a huge deal. And they put their name on stuff and they get paid in stock, and that's their thing. That's what they do. But as you looked at that company, nobody really understood what was going on there. And I do think that's the responsibility of the board. So if we ever had a deal come in where it's like, well, these guys say they have this interesting thing, but we can't verify it. I've seen that happen before. So make sure that the people that are around really do understand it, and it's not enough to just have a big name. I remember looking at a deal with a guy in central Iowa, rural Iowa. He had this amazing technology, and every time it came a chance to actually prove that it worked, like, oh, this part didn't come in and we can't do this test, and oh, these guys didn't show up today, so the thing didn't get cleaned out. So it was just excuse after excuse, and then I realized, like, this isn't real. And hopefully somebody gets to that stage before you get hundreds of millions invested and thousands of employees and labs set up all over the world. It's really unfortunate, and I'd like to think that hopefully she was doing her best, but I don't think that she was. So that's done.
Esther's question right before kind of spurred something. So, and whether it was on purpose or if she was a visionary that didn't necessarily have the backing to really make something take place. Where do visionaries fit in sort of this entrepreneurial environment? Because they're like someone like Ray Kurzweil or Elon Musk or somebody who has big visions, but maybe not the practical or the business sense to make some of this stuff happen. I think his stock just went down recently when he announced he wanted to get more into the battery business, I think. Or
Elon, yeah.
I'm assuming you probably work with a lot of maybe visionaries that don't quite have the skills to say, all right, we need to go through the process and the steps and maybe a bit more of a practical approach. Where do they fit into that mix?
Yeah, I think it's good to have a visionary. Actually, the story that I like there is George Lucas at Industrial Light and Magic demanding that his vision be created by all the people that was working for him. And a lot of the things that he wanted didn't exist. And he's like, fine, invent it. And when you're doing a special effect, that's an achievable thing. Like, that's cool. And it turns out that's why Industrial Light and Magic's a big deal and Star Wars is awesome. Like, that's what it was. When you're doing it sometimes in a business, you can't violate the rules of science. Like, there's laws of thermodynamics that can't be violated. So some of these things on batteries especially, I'm not a big battery fan because I don't think it's an effective way to store energy. There's a cost to it, it decays, and when you solve it by getting bigger, you also get heavier, and then it's not as transportable. And then, so I think that there's some core issues that there are times where you can solve those, and maybe the technology comes along and it's way better, and that's fantastic. However, you do have to follow the laws of physics. So in certain situations it works out, sometimes it doesn't.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us tonight. Can you please help me give a round of applause for Michael?
Thank you.
I also just wanted to remind everyone that we will be having 3 more guest speakers coming this spring semester, and also to feel free to stick around and enjoy some refreshments. Thank you and have a good night.